So I hope you're all feeling refreshed after the wind in your hair. My name's Sally Kift. I'm the President of the Australian Learning and Teaching Fellows, and I welcome you all here again for this next session. An interesting session with Heather Alexander and Shelda, Debowski. So we're talking about now the casualisation, workloads and research. Where does quality fit? Now each of Heather and Shelda are going to speak for 20 minutes and then we'll have a discussion. So thank you, Heather.
Shelda and I divided this. That's on. Everyone can hear me? Yes? Good. Shelda and I divided this in the sense that I'm going to cover a little bit about repositioning quality in the current situation that we're in, and Shelda's going to take up the issue of casualisation of workforce. Now, I was driving home. Oh, no, I wasn't. It was morning. I was driving between campuses, and it was a morning program, and I'm already on my second campus for the day, so it's a bit depressing. And was listening to a segment on the ABC Brisbane radio with Steve Austin, and he had a session called Hidden Persuaders, and it's with Alan Bonsall from lookingglass.com, John Hanson, Dr. John Hanson from the University of Queensland, and Amanda Newbury from Articulous Communications. And when it got to the last 3 or 4 minutes, I thought, I've got to go and get that tape. So I'm going to play it for you, and as it's playing, I'll put some ideas on, like a concept map on the board. Okay, folks, I'm really sorry about that. It played at lunchtime. I don't know what's happened between lunchtime and walking back, but such is life with technology. Okay. I won't be able to play the tape, but I can tell you about what they were saying, and that might have to do. First thing was, and it was particularly John Hanson was saying that the ABC had to undertake some form of measurement because they're publicly accountable. They're accountable because they're publicly funded. He spoke of the only measurement that they use being ratings. And Steve Austin pointed out that while they measure the ratings, they're actually governed by the editorial charter. It was pointed out that they're operating in a very competitive environment and they have to produce a quality product. And this discussion started as a chat about the fact that some executives of the ABC, their salaries were placed up publicly on a website. And it was about being transparent and accountable and what does that actually mean. So it was quite a long clip, but it was the last few minutes and I'm really sorry I can't play it for you. Amanda Newbury pointed out that ratings aren't really the be-all and end-all and that they needed more sophisticated measures, and she's looking at things like whether it actually moves people to think differently, and really quite sophisticated measures, and that we needed to know the audience that they were targeting. It was also pointed out during the clip that the ratings, while they might not be a good source of measurement, they're the only source that they have, and while it might be nice to know does the station actually move people to think differently and what does it do to the audience, we don't have a measure of it, so you can't do it. And that we needed to measure engagement with the audience, and that can now be done through social media, that they can actually have an index of engagement through the use of measuring social media hits. So I was listening to this as I was driving along going, I have a sense of deja vu. This is awfully similar to higher education. So I sat down and thought, well, what would that diagram look like for us? And I thought we need to measure what we're doing, that we are accountable, that we are publicly funded mostly, that we have a simple measure which we use called student satisfaction, which is not perfect, but it's one of the only ones that we've got that's readily usable, that we don't have an editorial charter, but we have regulation through TEXA, and we have the Higher Education Standards Panel producing some guidance about the kinds of things that we should be trying to achieve. We also have an environment where students are paying for their education, and they want to know we're doing a good thing. We do work in a competitive environment, we have mass education. And our quality product, really, in terms of teaching and learning, I've parked research for the moment, I'm just concentrating on teaching and learning. In terms of teaching and learning, the quality graduate is our quality product. We do need more sophisticated measures, and we need to know our students and also our stakeholders because we have that additional layer of accreditation by professional bodies where appropriate to the program. And we need to measure engagement. So it looks pretty similar. It looked awfully similar to me. and the fact that they both rely heavily on an imperfect measurement instrument, largely. I know we've got a lot of instruments we can use, but the often quoted and used one is student evaluations. They both lack more sophisticated measures, they both work in a competitive environment, and they both aim for quality output. But what do we mean by quality? If you have a look at the TEQSA Act, section 60 on quality assessments, you can see in A they're looking at assessing the level of quality of higher education. And in point C, they're assessing the level of quality of courses of study. Two very, very different approaches and concepts of quality. So, when we say quality, are we referring to quality of the higher education sector, the quality of higher education, the quality of undergraduate education, the quality of programs, the quality of teaching, or the quality of learning? In each one of those situations, how you define quality will be really quite different. Diana Green in 1994 wrote a paper and trying to define quality, and she speaks of the traditional definition is providing a product or service that's distinctive or special, confirmation that you meet a specification of standards, quality as fitness for purpose, the extent to which a product or service meets its stated needs and stated purpose, and that's often used in higher education, is fitness for purpose, meeting customers' stated or implied needs, and it's really not a single concept. It's many different things in different contexts. Gibbs in 2010, I'm sure many of you have seen his publication, Dimensions of Quality. He takes Biggs's 3P model and talks about factors in each of the 3 Ps that can influence quality of teaching and quality of education. Doesn't really get at a definition of quality though. And he does address the difficulties of defining quality in his paper. We can take different approaches to defining quality. Harvey and Williams looks at an absolute approach. So if you meet a certain standard, then you get the tick for quality. You have a world-class program or a world-class research institute or whatever, but there'd be a standard set, and if you meet the standard, you're okay. If we meet the standard for the Higher Education Standards Panel sets, then TEQSA will give us the tick. So that's the absolute one. Being fit for purpose is one I've already mentioned. And the third one that they describe is being transformative. That quality in education means it's a transformative experience for the student. Graham Gibbs, though, says that transformative education is not what the students want or like, but what is known to work in terms of educational effectiveness. And those two are sometimes the same thing, but sometimes they're not. Which brings us back to the issue of only using student satisfaction as your measure of quality. There are tensions between quality assurance and quality enhancement. So you've got quality assurance, and both processes happen in higher education. Quality assurance, it tests whether it addresses a product or service, it conforms to the requirements for that service. So you're checking that it is functioning as it should. Quality improvement or quality enhancement is more transformative and requires a deliberate change strategy. And there's a tension between these things. If you have a look at TEQSA and the report that's recently come out about the review of TEQSA, there's a tension about whether TEQSA should continue to function both as a regulator and a quality assurance body, or whether a statements emanating from TEQSA sometimes suggest it should primarily be a regulator and leave quality assurance, quality enhancement to develop elsewhere. Can you be a regulator and a quality enhancement agency at the same time? I've hit that working in the medical council, where you've got a fine line between being a regulator and actually assisting universities to be to quality enhance their service. Many of these things come back to organisational culture. I'm going to mention it again in a moment with respect to casualisation of the workforce. In that same review of TEQSA, it says about halfway through that the ultimate success of any quality initiatives will depend on individual staff and the culture of their disciplines, fields and professions, and their institutions more than on a national regulator. So what they're saying is the root of quality development is in the schools. So the sense of organisational culture is really very important. Lomas says that embedding quality needs a conducive organisational culture. So it's an important point. Keep that in mind for a moment. Its quality is a dynamic construct. The OECD report on Learning Our Lesson Review of Quality Teaching in Higher Ed says that quality teaching has to be thought of dynamically in the light of contextual shifts in the higher education environment. It's not a static thing. You can't come up with a definition of quality and it sits there for many years. And York points out, Mance York in his paper in 1999, which is a very good paper, says that quality and standards are open to interpretations which depend upon the interpreter's perspective. So you might have a very different approach to what you think quality is than I might on the same issue and the same service. My proposition is we need new definitions. We need to expand how we think of quality. We're moving into a new environment, particularly with the introduction of technology-enabled learning. We were looking just at campus-based teaching in the past. We're now looking at online or distance education. We're looking at transnational education. Internationalisation is also an important influence on the definition of quality in higher education. And of course we've got MOOCs, which can fragment and really fundamentally change the student experience if they're accredited and students undertake them as part of their course, which is happening in the States. So we talked about measurement needed, being accountable and being publicly funded. When that funding drops, which is too often our experience, you get the increased casualisation of the workforce. I'm not going into this in detail because Shelda's going to cover that now. I'll just mention it very briefly and how it relates to the concepts I've brought up about quality. It can have a plus and a minus, a positive and negative effect on learning and teaching. In our institution, a large percentage of the staff who get letters from the DVCA saying how wonderful their student ratings are our casual staff. They teach really well. They can be excellent teachers. But what's wrong, and what Percy and Beaumont showed in their analysis paper in 2008, is that they're not integrated and integrated into the culture of that organisation or that school or that department or that element, and they're just left out there. They might be independently very good teachers, but they're not integrated into the organisational culture. They're not valued, they're not recognised, they're not developed. There's a large human cost to the casualisation. And that's all going to affect on the quality of our product or the quality graduate. When you combine reduced funding with increased costs, and you also combine it with an environment that's changing where students are time poor, that they do want more flexible access to education, you get the introduction of online and blended programs. So we are all moving to the introduction of more online resources, online programs, online teaching. But we really don't know yet what effect that's going to have on the quality of our graduate, even though we have to define quality. So the key points. One is you can't define quality and have a single definition that's going to suit everyone. If you're going to try to define it, and you should define it how you're using it, if you're going to write something about quality, you need to define it in context and as required. So you define it for your paper, you define it for your project, you say this is how we're approaching the issue of quality in this context, because it's very context dependent. We do need to look at new definitions of quality to include technology, the influences of technology-enabled learning. We need a fundamental shift in institutional culture, particularly with the introduction of highly casualised workforce. And to embed quality, we need a fundamental shift in culture of the organisation, and we need much more varied and sophisticated measures. I haven't had time to go into that this morning, but they would be my 4 key messages about what we need to do in quality. Thank you. Shelda.
So, casual staff. You know, it's that sort of word that just goes off the tongue and just is really easy to say, and we actually don't think about it, because most of us, actually I'm now casual staff again, but anyway, most of us feel that it's not going to be us, and yet what we're seeing is an increasing mobilisation of people out from the core fraternity of academe into other things. So it's something many of us may actually experience later in our career as well as early in our career. So what I'd like to do is actually give you a little bit more of an internal look at what it's like to be a casual staff member before we look at some of the other issues. So I'd like to introduce John to you. John's my husband. John is semi-retired. He used to be the most senior engineer in the health department in WA, and now he operates as a part-time consultant for a company. And he was approached by a university to set up an integrated capstone unit in engineering. It took him a year to develop the unit because there were no resources available, and so he was paid for that body of work. He noted that he was probably paid about a third of what he would have been paid as a consultant role, but he accepted that and was keen to get going into the teaching. He'd been advised he'd have 15 students. He had 45. He'd been advised that he would be paid commensurately with his status, and in total, over the semester, he received $6,000 for 4 hours a week teaching. And he wasn't paid for the final week of semester because that's just revision. He wasn't paid for exam marking because that was included. And of course he wasn't paid for the assessments as such because that was included in his teaching costs. So as a person who'd always been very accustomed to being highly venerated and respected for what he could bring, that was quite confronting to him. But he did love the teaching. He loved sharing his knowledge. He loved the fact that he was integrating industry with the students, and a lot of the students were incredibly excited by what he was sharing, and they came to him and said, "You are doing the best teaching we've ever had," which made him feel great. Second year round, a little reluctant to start again because he knew how much work it was. He was putting at least 3 days a week in for the 4 hours, even as a repeat process, because he was improving. But of course, he felt the students really did value that. So, second time round, off he went. This time, the cohort was very different. So, out of the 40-something students, only 8 were regulars. And he agonised over that. What am I doing differently? What am I doing wrong? What's going on? And of course, he didn't actually have his lectures being taped and put onto any other electronic lectopia or anything else. So the students couldn't get access to his information unless they came. Many of them started sending him emails, all hours of the night and day, saying, "Can you give me guidance on this? I missed the class and I need it now." And of course, he, being used to being, very much in charge of hospitals and all sorts of other things, said, "No, you didn't come. Bugger off." So, not quite like that, but very close. Anyway, end of semester, he got hauled up because his student ratings were highly divisive. There were 8 who said he was the best thing since sliced bread. There were 30-something who said, "This man is awful," and our marks were not good enough, etc., etc. So, despite the fact that he'd had an academic who had guided, coached, nurtured and supported him throughout, for which he was very grateful, John decided this was not a career for him in the future, and he decided he would not keep going. And it was very sad to watch this as someone who felt he had much to offer, because you could see the high potential there was for him to be someone students would really get a lot from, but the difficulties of coming in and adapting into a culture that is really tricky. Casuals workforces are really tough. It's a tough gig, whether you're young or whether you're older. So, is it a bad thing? Certainly there's a lot of rhetoric around how good it is, and we could all put down, if I were to ask you to take 2 minutes and jot down some pros and cons, you'd certainly be able to do so. And we'd be able to argue that it enriches our knowledge academy by bringing in high levels of expertise. And for those who come in as juniors, it's a wonderful apprenticeship into teaching and research later. It's also going to give students access to passionate, really committed individuals who see this as a vocation. On the other hand, we are now looking at the fact that most of the people who touch our students in some way or other are not part of the core academy. We are a fragmented academy, and this has some real implications for how we operate and how we manage the quality of our delivery in terms of learning and other matters that impact on our universities. It's proving, I actually went back to look at some of the knowledge we have around casualisation, And I was horrified to see that in the latest stats for Australian higher ed, casual staff are excluded. And part of the reason for that is probably that it's very difficult, but it also could be that the data that's come through has been shown to be highly flawed. I'll come back to that a little bit later, I'll show you why. But we don't register it, we don't record it. Most of the contracts are very short term, so you're going to have people who are there for 5 months, 3 months, 4 months, and who are only paid for a very tiny time by hours, so not even fractional, so they don't even get a holiday equivalent or sick leave or anything, just by the hours that they are physically there. And of course what that means is universities do not actually know, for the most part, who they have had as casual staff, and do they care, which is an eternal issue I think we need to think about. So the type of appointment is variable and I think abusive, and most of the appointments are also quite hard to track, including research staff being used as teachers, often for no pay. So a huge amount of abuse is happening, and we are not questioning or challenging any of it. We're accepting it as part of the status quo. It's been called the casualised periphery. I'd actually suggest it's the casualised majority, but we'll come back to that as well. So the majority of people who are casual teachers for us are postgraduate students, female mostly, industry experts, maybe not for long once they experience what's really in there, those who wish to be academic aspirants who are trying to get into academe. They choose to be casual because it gives them flexibility if they wish to have a bit more of a varied lifestyle, or they're retirees or semi-retirees. So we have accepted for the most part that this is the sort of catchment that we have, and we've just become immune, I think, to some of the issues that then come through from that. So let's have a look at that. Over half of our undergraduate teaching is taught by casual staff. That must send alarm bells through us all, because how do we know what is happening with those folk? They are largely an invisible workforce. They come, they deliver, they go, and we don't see them overly much. So we're relying on them being incredibly professional without a lot of support or engagement from us. As was said earlier, it is actually now 60% of all teaching staff are casual, and 6 to 7 people add up to 1 full-time equivalent. So that's a lot of bodies being coordinated. And I know in my last role as a DVC, I was signing fractional and casual appointments almost 2 hours a week, because there was just this constant churn of new people coming in and being replaced. DEWA reckons there's 10,000. May, in their recent study of uni superstats, where they went back and looked at how much people were paid, even for a small amount, identified 67,000. That is a big difference in our understanding of who is casual, and it really raises alarm bells for us. Most are women, and more than 50% are 32 years and younger. I went on a Churchill Fellowship last year across a number of countries, and I spoke to people about the new generation coming through. And a clear message that came out was, it doesn't really matter how we treat them, they're fodder, there's plenty more where they came from. I think we're going to see a major crisis as we move along, because there are many young academics that I've worked with who now start to say, I don't know if I want to be part of this, and with good reason, because we are not kind to them and we're not generous. These are the typical experiences a casual staff member encounters. They get late notice, they get unpredictable loads. Some of them are cut back after 3 weeks because the students have dropped out, and once the census date hits, so they're the fodder. All of a sudden they've gone from 12 hours a week to 6. Sorry, don't care if you can't raise your family, not my problem, it's all about the economics. They have multiple short-term contracts. I've met people who've had up to 8, 9 years and longer as short-term contractors. Now, the union says you can't employ them for that length of time, but that's for continuous appointments and contract. If you employ people for 10 months and then have a 2-month break, which many unis are doing, you're not continuous. So you could go 20, 30 years as a casual staff member, unsupported. Most people note they're invisible, they're isolated, all of these things, unpaid, underpaid, unrecognised. They don't get benefits, they can't use super. Or actually some of them can, they can go into accumulation, but there's not a great deal of benefit there, and they certainly feel undervalued and marginalised. So this is not a happy scene for them, and it is certainly not a scene that's encouraging them to see quality as a high issue, because survival is, I'm afraid, a far more pressing matter for them. I mentor one woman, for example, who teaches across 3 universities in order to manage and eke out a small existence. And she's been doing that now since I met her 9 years ago. It's a tough life. Now, I'd actually like to bring us back. We've talked a lot today about values and priorities, and I think it's very important to recognise what do we need in order to flourish. And this is the mantra of Martin Seligman, the originator of positive psychology. And what he argues is that we as knowledge people, as people who think and want to be engaged with our world, need 5 things. We need to have a positive outlook on our world and to how we see ourselves. We need to be engaged. We need to have good relationships. We require meaningful work, and we need to feel a sense of achievement. Now, for academics, I would argue when we talk about identity, I think that's one of the most critical things academics need. And I would argue that those who are casual academics need the same thing. But if we were to look at how we treat them, we're not offering that to them as part of our psychological contract to casuals. We're using, abusing, and discarding them as we see fit. So there's a lot of emergent issues we need to think about. In terms of the individual casual academic, they're not being advanced through their career. Many are being used to the same level, same pay rates, same process, year after year after year. It is not setting them up for academic success as an academic in the future. They don't get remuneration that advances with experience. They're not being developed. They don't get recognised, and they're not being integrated into the fraternity. They don't get invited to staff retreats. They don't get invited to participate in development activities. So they're feeling very, very under-nurtured and underdeveloped. In terms of those who coordinate casual teams and try to provide the support, again, how do they learn about their role? We know what needs to be covered in those coordination programs for them, but not many universities have actually taken that on board with a great deal of fervour. We also recognise that there are huge workloads, particularly if you have a large, diverse casual workforce that you're coordinating as a coordinator. And yet, that's not necessarily recognised in the workload formula that are there. They're not trained in moderation and other aspects of this, and it's very hard to monitor the outcomes and to get some idea of how the quality is evolving for that course until toward the end, or if a crisis hits. Coordination of large units as an academic who is in the core fraternity can have a severe career impact on the individual. These are big jobs, and they're not recognised for the load that they carry. Then let's look at the students. Some challenges they do encounter is that they love the academics who come in, and many of them are absolutely dedicated and wonderful. They do great things, but of course they're not on campus all the time. And if you think back to your own academic career, you had a lot of time to go and chat with academics who were around. We can't offer that. They're not there. And there are then the risks of inconsistent practice and support and a difficulty in building relationships. Finally, in terms of the sector and institutional strategies, we are actually setting ourselves up for some high risk. We're not looking ahead at the baby boomer departure, and we're starting to see those moves starting to happen. We're not measuring quality assurance, practice, and whether we're effective. and we're certainly not providing good control or regulation for those that we are working with who are casuals. So most of what I have seen is that it's crisis management. If someone's bad, all guns come in and we get organised and deal with things. But for the most part, we are just hoping that it's serendipitous management that'll work out for us and that it'll fix itself up. I think one of the challenges too is that our preparation of people into leadership roles in universities is disgusting, and it remains disgusting. And it's about time universities really started understanding how critical it is that leaders are prepared for the important role they play and that they are constantly updated and upgraded in those skills. We are relying on a trial and error approach to leadership right from executive levels down, and it is showing, it is actually leading to some quite fraught processes. So the other issue we have to think about is the institutional will to change. Do we want to change? Are we happy with this status quo? I'd suggest if we stay with this, we are really starting to create a time bomb that is going to cause us enormous challenges, both in terms of creating an augmented academy in the future and also making sure that we have people wanting to come in after having such difficult, casual, careless experiences in the past. So, big questions we need to think about, and I'm going to stop on this slide and we'll leave it up here as we have questions and discussion. So the big questions: is it time? Are we ready? Is there a will to look at what is being done in our universities? Are we going to look more closely at institutional models and practices and really start to ask, why do we have 60% casual staff? Surely there is enough predictability to start to draw those people in to the augmented academy, not a fragmented academy. How can we improve the casual experience of those who are in those roles, either by choice or by necessity? How do we make sure that they're being prepared as future faculty rather than being left abandoned and discarded whenever we don't need them? And I know some universities have been looking at this and taking a deep concern around it, but there are many others who are not, and that is a really big challenge for us. And finally, I would encourage us to think much more closely about what role faculties, and in faculties I mean leaders, faculty members, coordinators and fellow teachers, what role does each play in helping support both quality and casual staff? I was delighted this question was put on the program today. I think it's one of those hidden assumptions, those hidden principles we're just starting to accept as the way it is. And there was a call for arms this morning about starting to challenge our own assumptions about what we believe and know. I think this is one of those ones where we need to come forward and start questioning. Does it have to be this way? No, it doesn't. We've chosen to make it this way, but perhaps we need to start looking closely at what the implications are. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Shelda and Heather. There's a start for discussion, but we've had some very interesting conversation about what quality means, what's happening with casualisation. I'm conscious that Yoni Ryan's here, who did a big report for the ALTC or CARIC back in the day called the Red Report. It investigated all these various matters. Casualisation is something that's been with us for quite a period of time. For those of you who are so interested, the percentage of casual staff, and they call them casual staff, some of us might prefer to call them sessional staff, the percentage of casual staff is a TEXA risk indicator at the moment. But how they collect that data and what that number actually means. And we got red flagged, even though we've got my university, which I'll now disclose for the benefit of the tape, James Cook University got red flagged for casual staff because we had a 5% increase from a very low 8% to 13% You know, so you do wonder about some of these things. But let's have a conversation around those matters and what it means perhaps for the professionalisation of the academic workforce when we think about sessional staff and professionalising them if that's what's required. And I know various universities have staff training and staff support for them, and for the course coordinators and subject coordinators that are managing the considerable load with sessional staff. Birgit. You might just announce who you are and who your question's for.
Thank you. Birgit Lohman from University of the Sunshine Coast. Thanks for those presentations, they're very interesting. I had a question around how this all fits into the notion that in the future there might be an unbundling of academic of jobs. So there might be course designers, there might be course deliverers, there might be course assessors who are not the same people. Any thoughts on that as the brave new world of the future?
I think we should welcome it, actually. Listening to Susie earlier today, I think she's quite right. If we think of this as a professional domain, why do we all fit one box in one way? And that actually creates some quite difficult identity crises for people. Look at academics when they're asked to do administration. They have conniptions and they get the jitters because they're doing admin instead of academe stuff. And yet, when you look at really effective universities, they've often got a team that does comprise some early career academic or academic capable people filling some of these really important roles and learning some specialist skills. I think we need to be respectful of that diversity, and at the moment we've bundled ourselves into being just one of three types. And that is actually not doing us a good service, I don't believe. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Just quickly, in terms of quality, you can see where that might go, but you can also see an increasing fragmentation in the workforce. And in terms of quality, the processes are going to have to change to keep all those people in touch with each other and keep some coherence for the student in terms of their whole experience.
You've got a question up the back and then Yoli.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Huda. I actually fit all the criteria that you've just outlined to us. So I'm the statistic right here in relation to sessional staff. First of all, I want to say thank you for bringing light onto an area of academia that hasn't or goes unspoken about most of the time. But most of all, I wanted to bring our attention to the positives of it as well, because there really, really are. And yes, although I fit the statistic that you've just spoken about, so yes, under 30, under 32, don't know what I'm doing next semester, however I'm unit coordinating over summer. I do it because I love it. And every other sessional academic that you'll speak to, regardless of if they're working at 3 different universities or 1 university, they will tell you exactly the same. To also bring light to the level of expertise that actually come through sessional academics. Here at the business school, we have the ex-assistant commissioner of tax teaching. We also have an international tax specialist who worked 6 years in the Big 4 accounting firms. We have so many different experts, and the students absolutely love what we have to bring. And so we actually enjoy what we have to bring, although yes, we don't know our workloads for the next semesters, we don't know where we fit. Here at the QUT Business School, we tend to have a really great culture as well. So it's not all doom and gloom. And so I just wanted to point that out and also say thank you for bringing that up. So thanks.
Thank you.
So we've got a question here, and then if the microphone could go to the middle.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you both. The area, I think, has moved on a lot since the report that Sally alluded to that a number of colleagues and I did. And I've been very pleased that in the last couple of universities that I've been involved in, not only has there been a move to, and this has basically been picked up by HR departments to convert some casual positions into fractional full-time, which at least gives you a chance to go to the bank manager and get some sort of a mortgage. But also for example, to open and encourage many more sessional staff to undertake graduate certificates in higher education or academic practice. And they are supported, at least within one university that I was at until last year. We actually paid the casual academics to attend that course. So I think there's been some movement. I don't know whether Susie would have the statistics from Tilly's work about the impact of that RED report, but I think that work and the work that the NTU is doing with soon to be Dr. May, or perhaps already is, around casualisation, has shifted the sector in the area that it need to be shifted most, and that is in HR departments, not so much in the academic area, where I think heads of school are quite aware of the impositions that they make on casual staff, even if they don't feel the pain at the personal level.
Yoni, I mean, I agree. Having worked in an HR stream as an academic director, I'm very conscious of the concerns that HR departments have had, and part of that's been driven by the industrial relations changes that were required. But I have seen a lot of rorts then happening as to how you change it so that you still don't have to put them onto more continuous appointments. 67,000 people, yeah, it's still a very big issue. I would challenge whether faculties are actually engaging with this as much as they should be. Having worked a lot with deans, I don't see that being front of mind. In fact, survival in terms of economic imperatives is much more critical, and this is actually a disposable workforce that is flexible, as opposed to their core people who are much more problematic to move on if you need to. So many of them are using this as their convenience tool, and unfortunately that's also combining with the fact that for the most part, if they get some development, it's through the academic development area, but they're not getting a lot through many of the faculties. Some faculties, yes, very committed, but majority, probably not. So there's a question in the
Thank you. Listening to the conversation today, I'm wondering whether the higher education sector is heading to a disaster. In the morning, people were complaining the academics are not being recognized, rewarded on learning and teaching, and not promoted. In the afternoon, casual staff being exploited and the quality being ignored. On the casual staff, I don't know whether you could clarify, you said one full-time academic is equal to 6 to 7. Is it in terms of dollar value, or is it in terms of work output? One thing. The other one is, I'm wondering if, coming back to Heather's model, where competition and the quality and the indicators, shouldn't they stabilize this and bring back, because I'm one of those who are concerned about employing casual staff and managing them and maintaining the quality. So what's, are we not finding the right performance indicators to go back and look, convert them into contract or something? Or what's, can somebody elaborate on those points, please? Thank you.
I think it's a combination of effects. I mean, no, we don't have the right kind of measures in place, but I think it's complex and multifactorial in terms of the effect on the quality. I think it's a hard one to answer, but certainly we don't have the right kind of measures. Yeah. Do you have comments?
I actually don't think we're asking the right kind of questions. And I mean, I've attended a lot of the higher ed summits, you know, the commercial ones where all the VCs come out and do their spruik about their place and head off again and say, yes, I've done a good marketing thing. I don't see a lot of reflection around these questions for the most part. And that's problematic, because we do need to start asking ourselves, are we ready for the new future? I see a lot of people starting to say, I'm done. This is 50 to 55, you know, the baby boomers are starting to say there's more to life than this. The quantum leap in criteria for performance, I'm finished. And I think we are going, and we actually have a real dearth of the middle level leaders ready or willing to come forward. And then, of course, we have this blowout in people who are not being geared up and well prepared to take the full brunt of academe on. So, yeah, I actually do think we're going to be heading for some fairly big challenges in the future, which might be very healthy, because we'll have to start asking those questions maybe.
Thank you. I should have introduced, I'm Muthu from Griffith University. Thank you.
Hello, Paul Tilley from USQ. I was John, by the way, just not that long ago. I suppose the biggest issues I've sort of got with modern universities is that they're no longer educational institutions. They're businesses that just happen to deal in education. And a lot of the issues that we have regarding quality, particularly in relation to assessment of learning outcomes and all the rest of it, and in relation to sessional staff, has to do with financial issues. Couple of examples. One of the courses that I was involved with had 150 students, each paying $3,000 for the privilege of being in that particular postgraduate course. The amount of money allowed for the teaching was $15,000. Think about that from a percentage basis. From a sessionals point of view, yes, you're basically right. We're treated like disposables, whatever you want to call it. You were right regarding sort of whether or not we'd be told what we're going to be doing within a certain time frame. If we had bad reviews from students because we were actually trying to do the right thing and give them a proper education, actually get them to actually do assignments that are worthwhile and so forth, you get a bad assessment. Of course, that wasn't good to the school, the head of school or the dean or the faculty, because their bonuses were based on the quality of the assessments that the students were giving to individuals. So it was a sort of a bad way of sort of organising things. The quality of the output itself, you'd be required to produce the assessments, mark the assessments. It actually had got better where I was because they actually did pay for marking eventually, but it was at a very low rate, and you wonder, why am I bothering to do this? But the hours that they gave you basically meant that the method of assessment was not based on the learning outcomes, it was based on how long it took you to mark. And that was the criteria that you had to basically work on to determine an assessment. And that actually still goes in whether you're full-time or not.
That's right.
You know, where I am at the moment, it's 1 hour per student per semester. Try and work that out. Anyway, I just sort of thought I'd identify that, yeah, you're basically sort of spot on. And we do have a major problem because there's a lot of sessionals out there who are basically saying this isn't good enough.
There's quite a bit in the literature about cost being the driving force for many educational decisions now, rather than what the teacher or the student actually needs. And I think what you've said is very true, and it's being experienced all over the place. It's affecting not just quality of teaching, it's affecting quality of assessment through marking, through these time limitations of how long can be spent. So we're being cost-driven rather than educationally driven in terms of what we're doing. I agree with you.
There was another issue as well, quickly, in relation to people actually doing the work. It was mentioned earlier about early career academics, people who have a PhD, right, who got the job over somebody who didn't have a PhD, who could actually do the work, had the experience and so forth.
Yeah.
And so they hire the early career academic with PhD so he could do some research, but still had to deal with the fact that individuals had to actually teach the students in an area that required knowledge of the industry, knowledge of the material, and have some sort of teaching capability as well. So they're hiring the wrong people first.
Right, we've got 3 more questions. I'm sorry, in the time that's still permitting. So here, and then at the back.
Thank you. Just a point to raise for Shelda. You mentioned that academic management are taking that as a convenience option to casualise the workforce. Well, keep in mind that the academic sector is not the only one doing casualisation. It's a way of the modern 21st century workplace.
It's true.
And I, with respect to our less than 32-year-old sessional, and I'm the John. I'm the retiree.
There's a lot of Johns in this room.
I've been doing this for about 15 years with my university. I thoroughly enjoy it. And I guess the comments up here about would reflect what I would think and believe, that I do it because I love it. I was going to my classes, my students, because I enjoyed being there. regardless of being a sectional. And looking at that, what role do faculty play in supporting quality and casual staff? It's pleasing to hear your DV say that our sectionals are highly valued and we're going to look after you in an open forum. That gives us that thread of hope that that's fine. But and having said that, if there's opportunities for full-time versus sectional to do something, I would gladly step back and say, you're a full-timer, you take the opportunity. If there's anything left, well, I'm happy to sort of put my hand up. So I take it for a sectional for 15 years, and I just play my year by year, and that's my convenience. So I play one-on-one too. And we are a demand-driven entity. My class didn't reach 5, so it was cancelled.
Sure.
Summer semester gone. My wife, who said, well, where's the cash flow coming? I said, don't worry about the cash flow, dear. We've only been married for 45 years. We'll get through. It's next term. Yeah. So, yeah, it's just the way a sectional life is. And I, for one, am very satisfied. I've been treated very well by my university, and I'm happy with that.
So just the quick rejoinder I'd say on that is industry pays a lot for casual because it recognises that short-term nature, and it would not normally be a 13 to 14 week appointment. So I think there are some differences to industry versus universities in how we're doing these transactions.
Yeah, hi, Terry Clark from University of Southern Queensland. I'd just like to support my colleague Paul Tilley's sentiments. I think a dangerous tipping point arises when more than 50% of the teaching is done by casual staff. I'd also observed that corporate managerialism rules. I had a conversation with a head of school on Monday evening, and he recounted to me an argument he'd had earlier in the day with his executive dean over contract employees. And now it's not just sessionals that find themselves, under pressure. I think a lot of contract staff that are on, let's say, dubious sorts of contracts. And he recounted to me how his executive dean on Monday had wanted to reduce the pay of contract staff by 50% over Christmas. Now, his reward was around economic performance. He'd previously worked at Qantas, where he had a lot of experience in sacking people. But fortunately, my colleague, the head of school, stood his ground and said that we would not be paying people 50% over Christmas, and after being told that he was unprofessional and had no idea about business, and he confessed, he said, oh, look, I do have no idea about business, but I've been in this job, teaching people for about 40 years, and I actually know how to treat people well and how to retain good staff. But it was quite I believe, a tense argument that he had with his executive dean, who's rewarded around monetary performance. He also observed that in his field engineering, it's particularly difficult to get good staff, particularly those people who can teach things like engineering mathematics, and that the prospect of paying people 50% over Christmas wasn't a good retention policy. The other thing that I observed is I worked as a casual staff member for a number of years at another university in this town until quite recently, and I had been sort of in and out of the academy for about 35 years, but I was offered an induction for casual staff 3 years after I'd started in this casual job. And it was quite amusing because when we come to do the induction, I knew far more about life as a casual staff member than the person that was conducting the session. But at least we did get an induction 3 years in. Thank you.
Thank you.
And David.
Yeah. One of the things I don't think we're going to be able to deal with is if we're in denial about why this has happened.
Yeah.
I think we're only going to be able to deal with fixing some of the problems, and we are not going to be able to fix all the problems, Shelda, that you identified.
No.
The reason we employ casuals is because we have to balance the budget. If we didn't employ casuals, the teaching load would maybe double in many places. That would actually destroy a whole lot of things that our academics do. So it's very much in the interests of full-time academics for there to be large numbers of casuals, no matter how much they whinge about it. So the challenge we've got is to cope with the realities of the situation is we need casuals because they're cheap. And what we need to do is to think of creative ways of organising what we do so we treat those people well, but we can't pretend that we can provide all these other things for them because they will no longer be cheap and we will no longer be able to afford to employ them, and everyone else's workloads will go up. So Let's get a bit of reality in the discussions here.
I think, David, that's why I said in the quality slides that one of the major changes we need is a change in organisational culture. We need to treat people differently. We need to bring them in and integrate them into the school and the faculty and not just leave them out there lost. You know, they need to be treated well. There's no reason why they can't have adequate induction, adequate staff development, contribute those wonderful things to the school academics as well as to their students. They teach extremely well, but we don't treat them well. We don't bring them into the school culture, and that's what we need to change.
The other thing too, David, I think the other commentator is quite right. 60% is too much. I agree with you. I think they have a certain function. They're a very good training ground to identify high talent to bring forward and help bring along, but that is too big a proportion because what you're losing is you're just bringing people in to do a certain function, and you don't then have people who are able to contribute to that broader community and building of your school and faculty. So there has to be that balancing of the two. And I agree, you know, having overseen campus budgets and all the rest, I understand those pressure points, but I also understand the difficulties when you actually end up with a core faculty that is too small to actually carry the majority of the business. And it also means we need to start looking at different roles, different functions, and recognising those important facets. Thank you.
Can I just go quickly back? I'm John Beltmar from Griffith University. I've only got one comment, which is on the fact that we brought up that popularity contest is what actually is our measure of of success for teaching. And I think as an ex-director of quality for a large defence company over many years, that's the most stupid thing I've ever heard.
Thank you. All right, I'd like to thank both Heather and Shelda for that very useful discussion. Thank you.